Hello and welcome to the Parkinson's Foundation Wellness Wednesday program, PD Generation, What Have We Learned So Far? I'm Erin McGee, a Community Program Manager with the Parkinson's Foundation. The mission of the Parkinson's Foundation is to make lives better for people living with Parkinson's by improving care and advancing research today until there's a tomorrow without the disease. In everything we do, we build on the energy, experience, and passion of the global Parkinson's community. Our virtual PD Health at Home programs, including Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, and Fitness Fridays, are inspired by you, our viewers. We look forward to sharing exciting new programs with you each week and the months ahead. Today's session will be recorded and archived on parkinson.org/pdhealth. It is here that you can also find all upcoming and past virtual programs and events. Before we get started, we'd like to get to know our audience a little bit. We're going to launch a poll to find out what your connection is to Parkinson's. And we'll give that just a few moments to see who is in our audience today. All right, looks like we have the majority of people living with Parkinson's. So welcome everyone, thank you for joining us. And now I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Roy Alcalay. He is an Alfred and Minnie Bressler Associate Professor of Neurology at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. His research focuses on biomarkers and genetics in Parkinson's disease. He is the lead investigator of PD Generation. His research is supported by the NIH, the Parkinson's Foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and the SMART Foundation. He is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Silverstein Foundation for Parkinson's with GBA and the Parkinson's Foundation. We are excited to have him share his information about PD Generation as he is the principal investigator of this study. So welcome, Dr. Alcalay.
Thank you for inviting me. Just to confirm that you can all see my slides.
Yep, we can see it just fine.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to talk about PD Generation, and I hope that by the end of my talk, you will all be as excited about it as I am. And you'll see how timely it is and how exciting it is that the Parkinson's Foundation has taken upon itself to run PD Generation. So as you probably all know better than me, every person's journey with Parkinson's is unique. And Parkinson's disease is considered one condition, and when you try to get an FDA approval for a medication, it's considered one condition, Parkinson's disease, but it's really very, very different. And a lot of people experience Parkinson's differently with different symptoms, different prognosis, different response to medications. And part of the reasons for this heterogeneity is the genetics. It's very clear that there's a lot of genetic risk factors for Parkinson's, and there's not a single person that has all of them. So there's different types of genetic risk factors that would lead to Parkinson's, and probably leading to a slightly different Parkinson's disease with that regard. In 2004, a huge breakthrough happened in our understanding of the genetics of Parkinson's from two different angles. In one study that looked at large families of people affected with Parkinson's disease and actually also other neurodegenerative conditions, they discovered the gene called LRRK2, LRRK2. And in another study, in a completely different mechanism, researchers from Israel looked at the prevalence of a gene that is relatively more common in people of Jewish ancestry in their Parkinson's clinic and compared it to the controls in that city and said, wow, a lot of people with Parkinson's carry a mutation in that gene. That study, they actually showed that 30% of their people carried a GBA mutation. If you have a GBA mutation from both mom and dad, people develop Gaucher disease. So between these two genes, 2004, the genetics studies took a huge step up in our understanding of Parkinson's disease genetics. And initially what happened is that a lot of labs and a lot of researchers, like at that time, not even me, I was still in residency, started exploring these genes and how they may be linked to Parkinson's. But in parallel, people with Parkinson's started getting interested to see whether they carry a mutation in this gene. And this is an example of a report from 23andMe that at the time offered genetic testing for LRRK2 and GBA. And I can tell you that as a geneticist, I find this report confusing, but you can take a look at it while I talk and see that it says that they say your increased risk for Parkinson's, 57 people out of 100 men with this mutation would have Parkinson's disease. It wasn't very helpful to that person because he already had Parkinson's. It was 100 out of 100. And the mutation that they found is in the first row, where you see that it's changed in red, and it's in the LRRK2 gene, and they said that the adjusted odds ratio are 86.38. What exactly that means, I'm not 100% sure. I'm just showing you the report as the person gave it. At that time, doctors were not offering genetic testing or counseling for people with Parkinson's disease. And this is a cartoon adapted from The New Yorker, where the doctor is telling something to the patient and telling him, I see, and have you tried worrying about it? So the thought in the medical field is that we should not really return genetic results back to people with Parkinson's because there's not much to do besides maybe worrying about it. But this has changed in 2020. So when we surveyed physicians, participants in the Parkinson study group, which is a leading group of clinical trialists, physicians, that their focus of research is Parkinson's disease and other movement disorders, we realized that still most of them do not genetically test their participants, the people with Parkinson's whom they treat, and they don't really offer genetic testing. So 41% of them said they didn't send a single test in the past year, and that was 2019, and 80% of them said that they sent 10 or less. So the vast majority do not test. When we asked them, why don't you offer genetic testing for people with Parkinson's, they mentioned the lack of insurance or coverage of the cost. They said lack of perceived utility. What will people do with the result? And a third point that they made that was surprising to us is they said we're not comfortable telling people that they have a mutation because we don't know how to counsel if they carry one. And when we asked them to rate themselves from 0 to 100, 100 being very efficient in returning results back, very knowledgeable, they scored themselves at 52. So looking at these 3 points, lack of coverage for the cost of the genetic testing, lack of perceived utility, and the physician's knowledge in returning results back, you see that the Parkinson's Foundation has a lot of work to do. In contrast, we can ask, okay, so why would you share genetic testing? Why should we test people with Parkinson's or offer people with Parkinson's genetic testing? I think there's 4 reasons that I can think of. First is that people with early onset, where they're still in the family planning age, that can help when you decide about different treatments or fertility treatments, or if you want to hear about the risk of your offspring to develop Parkinson's, it's going to be different if you carry a mutation in a gene called Parkin, where in order to develop Parkinson's, you need mutations from both mom and dad. So the risk for offspring of people with PD is very small compared to dominant genes where the risk is higher. For people that are not in family planning stage, which is the vast majority of people with Parkinson's, there are other reasons. First of all, we realize that a lot of people with Parkinson's just want to know. 23andMe, the company that offers genetic testing with direct-to-consumer effort, reported that over 10,000 people with Parkinson's participated in their effort, and they donated data from their DNA to genetic studies of Parkinson's. So they have at least 10,000 participants with Parkinson's who wanted to know. The second reason is that if people want to know about their rate of progression of Parkinson's, the genetics can infer on it. We know that people with Parkin mutations or with LRRK2 mutations progress a little bit faster, a little bit slower, maybe less cognitive impairment, definitely less change in sense of smell if you carry mutations in Parkin. And if you carry a mutation in GBA, the progression is going to be a little bit faster. So when people want to know what's their expected progression over years, the genetics can help. But probably the most important factor, and that's the factor that is changing the game in 2020, is the genetic data may determine clinical trial eligibility. There are now clinical trials that are open only for people with genetic mutations, but you can't participate in them if you don't know that you carry a genetic mutation linked to Parkinson's. And there are many of these. To the top left, this is a press release from Sanofi, who is doing a clinical trial at phase 2. that some of the results will be released, we hope, at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and will change the field if they're positive, or slow down the field if they're negative. To the right, we see top right, there's a study by Allergan and LTI that was conducted in the Netherlands for GBA mutation carriers. There's also a study now ongoing in the United States by Prevel Therapeutics for GBA mutation carriers with injecting a virus with the healthy gene into the spinal fluids to see if that will correct Parkinson's. And in the gene LRRK2 that I mentioned earlier, there are now active 2 clinical trials in the middle and showing you Biogen using a mechanism that has been shown to work in other neurological conditions, and Denali Therapeutics, who has done 2 studies, one in the United States and one in Europe, for LRRK2 inhibitors for molecules that inhibit the enzyme. So lots of studies, not just one pharmaceutical, not just one gene, and you will be able to participate in these studies only if you're carriers and you know that you're carriers and want to participate. So why getting genetic results back to people in 2020? Multiple reasons. Part of them is eligibility to clinical trials. Part of them is that people just want to know. So with this gap that we want to let people participate in research if they want to, but the clinicians don't send people to genetic testing, that's exactly where PDGene comes into place to answer that gap in the availability. The idea of PD generation is to make genetic testing accessible both for people with Parkinson's and for their clinicians. If the Parkinson's Foundation funds and offers genetic counseling and testing, the question that clinicians raised about the cost of it and whether the insurance will pay for it or not goes away. So in PDGene, we analyze 7 key genes related to Parkinson's, the ones that are in the right, on the right-hand side in the green box, the ones that we got enough geneticists to agree that everybody is under the consensus that these genes are indeed linked to Parkinson's. The Parkinson's Foundation conducted a worldwide search for the best lab they can find, and the lab returns results within a few weeks. And after they return the results, a genetic counseling session takes place, and the participant, either in English or in Spanish, can get the results back of whether they're carriers of these 7 genes, yes or no, and if yes, the explanation, of course, is a little bit longer. If no, the explanation is shorter to understand that it doesn't mean that their Parkinson's is not genetic. It's just that we didn't find it when we looked in those 7 genes. And the goal is to reach a huge number of 15,000. Of course, this is a long-term goal that will take us a few years to get there. And where everybody gets genetic testing, everybody gets genetic counseling, because just to get a positive result without an explanation has been shown not to work well. If you want an example, not from the genetics, the Medicare and Medicaid recognize that just testing people for COVID and not giving them counseling if they're positive doesn't help. If we want to make the results meaningful, one needs to invest also in counseling. So when you get a positive result and a negative result, the implications of it are explained to the person who donated their sample. In addition, we're banking the DNA and we're collaborating with other groups to look into new genes, because we know that those 7 genes are not the end of genetics for Parkinson's, and how to look at the entire DNA to find more places on it that may be linked to Parkinson's. The idea is initially to recruit through centers of excellence, but as you'll see, we also converted it to, we expanded it to telemedicine and to in-clinic visits. The first 6 sites in the pilot to see whether we can do it, whether people are interested, whether we can return the results well, are Mass General in Boston, Columbia University in New York, University of Pennsylvania in Pennsylvania, Northwestern in Chicago, Strutters in Minnesota, and UCSD, University of San Diego in California. The enrollment was very quick when we started, but we had to stop the protocol in March because of COVID-19. And then in the long hiatus that we had, we did 2 things. First, you can see yellow stars on the map. These are additional sites trying to increase the diversity and expanding the states where there's an active site recruiting. And in parallel, we also developed a telemedicine or remote recruitment for people where it's not safe to go to the clinic to participate, or if the clinic that is a site for PD gene is too far away for them. In the pilot that was halted of over 300 participants, the recruitment was nationwide from 21 states represented. Of course, the 6 states where there are sites in them were the fastest recruiting sites. These are the states that are most represented. But now, because we converted to remote recruitment, one does not necessarily need to go to a site. You can start with looking into the Parkinson's Foundation website. As you can see in the slide, there is a video that explains about the genetic testing and about what does it mean to get the results and how will you get them. And you can actually review the informed consent online, and you can click that you would like to enroll. So the Parkinson's Foundation team can match you with a site to help enroll you or direct you to a site that can recruit you and can consent you for participation. In general, the visits include the traditional visit and in-person visit required 2 visits. One is when you donated the sample, the blood sample with the DNA, and the second is when the results were returned. Now, because of the telemedicine component, the first visit is broken into 2, where in the first visit one consents, and if the mode of recruitment is telemedicine, a buccal swab kit is shipped to your home, and then the buccal swab, inserting the swab into the mouth to collect DNA, is done in front of the research coordinator in a second visit. We collect a little bit of data about Parkinson's, about demographics, just so we know who's participating in the study, what's the disease duration of the Parkinson's, what medications one takes, brief motor and cognitive testing. And then when the results are back, a genetic counseling visit can be done either by phone or by Zoom, depends on which group, who is returning the results to the participants. What we did in the pilot is we wanted to see whether doctors can return the results as well, or should we just use genetic counselors. So participants were randomized, or are still randomized, either getting the results by phone from a genetic counselor or getting the results in person by the doctor or the treating institution where they were consented to. Now, initially it was either in-person visit or telephone call from the genetic counselor. Now that a lot of the sites do not do in-person visits, it's Zoom with a doctor versus genetic counseling session by phone. So just so you see who participated so far, the age range is very wide. It's ranging from 30 to 88, with average age 64. And men to women ratio is relatively even. Remember that Parkinson's is more common in men, it's 2 to 1. So, and also traditionally in studies, women tend to participate more than men. So the numbers are 57 men, 43 women so far. And surprising to us because we didn't expect it, newly diagnosed people were more likely to participate. So almost half of the people who participated were diagnosed with in the past 3 years. So the technology and the advancement in COVID-19 has been a challenge, but also an advancement because we can now offer it remotely. So just key points to expect is, one is the technology. If you're not living close to a site that can recruit you in person, one needs a computer with a webcam. It may be easier to have family members help people that are not as comfortable doing that. I can tell from my family that some people are very used to Zoom. My parents are used to that because that's their way to communicate with their grandchildren, but some people find it more difficult. So getting the help from family or from other people to use the telecommunication is extremely helpful. I think it's also clinically extremely helpful. So it's I highly recommend it either way. Time, expected 2-hour visit. It can be shorter, it can be longer. Bear with us. It's been a huge effort to convert it from an in-person visit, like all studies we do, to telemedicine. And we are hopeful that that will be an opening for a lot of more telemedicine studies. But of course, the beginning is a little bit challenging. For example, just to show you how challenging it is, we're trying to figure out whether a doctor in New York can give someone genetic counseling in California if they participated in the study. And the answer that we're getting from lawyers or from other stakeholders is that it's complex. We don't get a single answer, yes or no. And it's even more complex. It may be that it is okay now in COVID-19, but once the Medicare rules are changed and we can no longer do telemedicine across states, it won't be okay. So we're getting this advice and we're learning as we go. There are some interesting challenges that came up with the study. One of them is to get the geneticists that are linked, that do research on Parkinson's, can agree what genes are linked to Parkinson's. And it sounds like a simple question, but apparently it's not. If you did clinical testing through a genetic lab before PD generation, the results you would get are very different based on the lab that the sample would be sent to. So Invitae, it's a very commonly used genetic lab, tests for 16 genes. Athena Diagnostics, very commonly used genetic lab, tests for 5 genes. Centogene, which is a genetic lab, very well-known genetic lab from Germany, offers 36 genes. So the doctor and you send a sample for Parkinson's research, and you get 5 genes in one, results in one lab and 36 in another lab. Someone is not getting it right. So the Parkinson's Foundation is leading an effort with a submission to the National Institute of Health to try to standardize that, try to get a consensus diagnosis, getting all the leading geneticists in the world into one table, one virtual table by Zoom, to agree which genes are clearly linked to Parkinson's, and within these genes, which mutations are clearly linked to Parkinson's. And that's a lot of effort, but it will advance the research way beyond PD generation. The other question that we don't know about genetics, that 23andMe cannot answer, for example, is once you get the result, are you happy that you got them? Are you unhappy? Did you change anything in your life about it? And in order to answer these questions, PD generation requests participants to answer questions by, again, technology about satisfaction, about knowledge, and about impact. Of course, you don't want the research coordinator to ask, how satisfied are you with my performance? You want that filled out remotely by forms that are sent to you, again, via email or internet. We want to know satisfaction because if people are not satisfied, maybe we should rethink how we do it. We want to check knowledge because if people are very satisfied, but that's because we didn't inform them well, that's also would require us to change the way we go. And the most important question is impact. Once you got the genetic results, what did you do with them? Did you just get depressed or did you become happy? Did you share with your family? Did you look up clinical trials and enroll in them? Because the bottom line is we're all trying to improve Parkinson's care and we want to develop new therapies and enrich the field. Is this happening with PD generation? We will test that. Towards the very end, I just want to make one comment that is very important to understand. Understanding that the genetic makeup of a person may change their disease course is very, very well understood in cancer. There are some cancers that their treatment completely changed over the last 5 to 10 years because of what we call precision medicine. If in the past everybody was bombarded with the same chemotherapy, now in a lot of cancers, not all, the treatment, and some of it is biologic treatment and not chemotherapy, is targeting specific genetic mutations or specific alterations in the cancer based on the genetics. So precision medicine completely revolutionized the care of some cancers. We want Parkinson's to be next. We want the care for Parkinson's to be revolutionized by precision medicine. And we will be able to do that if enough people know their genotype, participate in clinical trials, and help us advance the field forward. Thank you. So I'll now stop sharing my slides, and I think Ann Hall is going to talk next.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Alcalay, for sharing your expertise and all this wonderful information. We'll see you back in a few minutes when we bring you back for Q&A. And as you mentioned, we're going to bring a friend, Ann Hall, to share her experience as a person living with Parkinson's and her role in creating the study and her direct experience participating in the research study. So I'm excited to announce Ann Hall, who is a very involved Parkinson's advocate. Let me tell you what she's involved in. She is a Parkinson's Foundation research advocate, a member of the FDA Patient Engagement Collaborative, research stakeholder at the University of California, San Francisco, member of the International Parkinson and Movement Disorder Society Task Force on Genetic Testing in Parkinson's, member of a steering committee, So thank you so much for spending your time with us today to share your expertise, Anne.
My pleasure, Erin. I also want to thank the Parkinson's Foundation for giving me the opportunity to speak with everyone about my experiences as a member of the steering committee and also as a participant in PDG. Excuse me. Just to give you a little bit of information about me, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's 11 years ago, and I've been a Parkinson's Foundation research advocate since 2015. I had DVS surgery in 2014, and that really changed things for me, making me able to have the wherewithal to be able to do a lot more and to give back to the community. A few years ago, I was interviewed by Neurology magazine, which is the magazine you usually see in the waiting room of your neurologist's office when you're waiting for your appointment. The article was about genetic testing and precision medicine for Parkinson's. And at that time, and I think this was maybe about 2016 or so, I was not really very interested in genetic testing. I just didn't see what the point was. Maybe just from an educational perspective, but that might be it. At that time, there was very little that could be done with the results. And it just didn't seem like the tests were all that sophisticated. They were looking at certain genes, but not a bunch of genes. They were looking at parts of genes, but not all of the gene. It just seemed that it was a little too early. Well, flash forward to now, and things are starting to look quite different. As Roy mentioned, there are 7 genes that have been established as being associated with Parkinson's disease, and those are being looked at fully by PD generation. More and more genes and variants are being considered all the time. There are about 40 or so that are currently being evaluated around the world, and since the blood will be banked, or the samples will be banked, as more and more information comes forward about which of those genes or variants are associated with Parkinson's, there's an opportunity for people who participate in this study to reconsent to have their samples retested for some of those other variants or genes. So that's a really great opportunity as well. Additionally, as researchers learn more about genes and their variants, clinicians can make more educated recommendations to patients about medications that might be better for certain genotypes than others, and can make better disease management treatment choices as well. So certain treatments may be more effective. Exercise may be more effective for certain people than others. We don't know that yet, but down the road, there could be all sorts of interesting information that may come out about how to manage our conditions. The genes can also help inform disease progression, as Roy mentioned, and also can help minimize clinical workups. Once they see that you have a genetic variant and you also present some clinical symptoms of Parkinson's, it may be less important to have numerous studies and numerous workups to see whether in fact you certainly have Parkinson's or not. When I was first diagnosed 11 years ago, I went through quite a bit of initial testing to establish whether the symptoms my doctor was seeing at the time were in fact Parkinson's, or maybe they were something else. And maybe with genetic testing, it will be possible to minimize some of that. It was I recall at the time it was quite stressful. It took quite a while to get a definitive diagnosis. And of course, there's more coming all the time, which is really exciting. So as a member of the steering committee, I've really been an integral part of the study design and the protocols we've used. I've helped draft some of the study questions that Roy mentioned, the satisfaction, knowledge, and impact questions about what the community might think about the study and how the results might impact on our lives. I've evaluated preliminary study results, asked a lot of questions about what those mean. And I've in general helped provide the patient perspective in all aspects of the research, which is really important. I've really felt very well respected, and my voice certainly has been heard by the researchers throughout the entire process of putting together PD generation. Very gratifying. So my participant status. In September 2019, I traveled to New York, where I was consented, interviewed, watched a little video, examined, and had my blood drawn by Dr. Roy and his research coordinator. Then I was randomized to receive my results in genetic counseling by telephone through Indiana University. Remember, this was before the COVID, so I didn't go back to New York. Rather, I just waited to get the results in the mail. And we can go to the next slide. So this is a redacted version of the results I received. There's a cover letter talking about the results, what was studied, what was looked at, what my results were, negative in my case, and then an actual report from Fulgent. In addition to all of this information, there was a packet of information and literature from the Parkinson's Foundation, much of which you can probably find online, but it was really helpful to have it all in one place, talking about the importance of clinical research, other studies that may be looking at certain things. If I had had different results, I probably would have had different inserts, but what various studies have shown, LRRK2 means, GBA, and so forth. So it was quite comprehensive, and the counseling took about 30 minutes or so. The whole entire thing, start to finish, took about 2.5 hours, including the counseling. So even though I did test negative, I felt it was really important to participate in the study, not only because I helped design it, I was really curious to see what it would look like from a patient perspective, but also because as a person who's had DVS, I'm pretty much excluded from most clinical trials. Also, as a person who's had Parkinson's for quite a number of years now, that's the same result. So although I used to participate in them, since I've had DVS, it's been very limiting. And through this study, I can certainly give back to the community by providing my genetic information, and hopefully researchers will be able to use my participation to further their information to the benefit of all of us with Parkinson's and our families. I also felt that the genetic information contributed to my overall health literacy, as I mentioned in one of his slides. About 10,000 people or so have had 23andMe testing for PD. This is a more comprehensive test, I felt, and the researchers were able to bank the samples so they could be tested again later. As you know, their genes don't change once you get the sample, and once the genes are identified, everything is fixed, and more information, they can study that fixed sample and find out more about you. So that really appealed to me as well. I don't have any children, but if I had them, I think this would have been important information, though this is very much an individual decision on that point. And I think it helped me do some life planning, knowing or confirming that I did not have any genetic variant that's known at this point. That may change over time, who knows. It could help me make some decisions about what I want to do with my life, travel after COVID's done, or go back to school, or whatever it is I have in mind to do. All those decisions can really be affected by the information that can be disclosed through the genetic test. And finally, I really feel like this is an opportunity to really enhance knowledge globally. And that was really important to me as well. So at this point, I will turn this back over to Erin. It's been a lovely opportunity to participate in PD Gene. It's been wonderful working with the researchers, and it's been great to be a participant in the study itself. So I really encourage you to participate if you've got any interest in it whatsoever. And I do hope you.
Thank you so much, Anne. It's very interesting to hear from the steering committee side to the participant side, so I appreciate that. All right, and now we'll bring Dr. Alcalay back as well, as we have plenty of time for some questions and answers. So we have time. If you have more questions, audience, feel free to submit them. But we'll get started with Dr. Alcalay. You both touched on this a little bit, but can you share just a little more about how PD generation is different from Michael J. Fox genetic testing and 23andMe? As we had a person say that they've started the enrollment, but not hearing a lot of information back from them. What would be the PD generation kind of flow, and how long would that timeline be?
Right. So the first question is, what's the difference between PD generation and Michael J. Fox PPMI and 23andMe? That's an easy question to answer, and I actually maybe should have devoted a slide or two to it. So the 23andMe initially offered more genetic testing for Parkinson's, and the FDA stopped them. So they're currently not returning results about 2 genes. They return results about 2 mutations. 1 mutation in the LRRK2 gene, 1 mutation in the GBA gene. In comparison, PD gene looks at around 300 mutations in GBA. So the coverage of the genes that are tested is completely different. In 23andMe, the limitations are because of the FDA. The Michael J. Fox PPMI study, because the endpoint is to recruit to PPMI and to be participants in PPMI, which is something that I would absolutely encourage, it tests only a couple of mutations. And again, it's LRRK2 G219S, GBA mutation N370S, but it's not a coverage of the entire gene. And it does not genotype for alpha-synuclein Parkin, PINK1, DJ1, VPS35. Now, the reason the panel of PD gene includes 7 genes and not 20 is because the experts we consulted with said these are the 7 that absolutely need to be returned. But the consent that you sign says that if in the future more genes are added, you, if you're interested, will get those results back. So the limitation is not what our lab did, is what we think now is meaningful to get back. And the plan is that when the panel gets larger, more genes or more results will be returned for those who consented for it. So a very big difference.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding, you said if you give your sample now and there's more genetic information that there's more than 7 links, they would send that information back to you. That's if you had those.
We will contact you to let you know, yes. So
okay.
when people participate in the study, they consent whether they want more data in the future or not. So far, if people already participate in PD gene, it means they do want more data. So I don't know if all, but the vast majority requested that if there's more data, they would want to get it. And we didn't limit it because of funding to 7 genes. We limited to 7 genes because these are the genes that we think are meaningful to get the results back. And if there's more, we will be inclined to return more.
Right. Okay. I think that's really exciting to say, hey, here's what we can offer you now. Who knows what the future will hold?
Right.
That's very exciting news. All right. Dr. Alcalay, another PD generation is just for the person with Parkinson's at this time. Do you see it covering other family members?
It's all about 2 issues. Issue number 1 that is easy to tell is funding, right? It's very, very hard to offer it to a lot of people who do not have Parkinson's. It's just like, I would start with people with Parkinson's. Now, the second issue is that the meaning of positive or negative result needs to be understood in context of the family member with Parkinson's. So let's say an example that Mr. Smith carries a mutation in VPS35. Now, if their child carries a mutation or doesn't carry, it's very important because if they don't carry a mutation, it means they didn't get the mutation from their dad. But if the person with Parkinson's doesn't carry a mutation in VPS35, the fact that a child of someone with Parkinson's doesn't have it is very hard to interpret, right? Because how do you make sense of it? So it makes much more sense to start with a person with Parkinson's. If they're negative to the panel, there's no point in testing the family. If they're positive, then the family's testing becomes more relevant, and then it really is an issue of resources that is holding us back.
Okay, so say there's a person with Parkinson's and their adult child wants to get the testing. You'd want the person with Parkinson's to get tested first,
right,
to know their status.
Right, because if they're negative, there's no point for the child to get tested. Because if the child comes back negative, it will be false reassurance that there's no genetics in the family. Well, there may be genetics in the family that we just didn't uncover it.
Okay, that makes sense. And you had touched on this a bit, but why would you bother getting tested if you're pretty certain you're negative? Like if you don't have any other family members or think environmental factors, what would still encourage someone to participate?
For me, as I mentioned, I think it's really important to give back to the community, and this is one way I can do that since, as I mentioned, I'm excluded from many clinical trials because of DBS and also longevity in the disease. Another reason why is it's free to the people who are tested. Some of these tests can be quite expensive. The other reason why it's important, and I think it's an incentive to participate, is PDG is a patient-centered program. We made sure that we used a CLIA certified lab so that we could return results to patients. A lot of research trials will test patients' genes, but they can't return the results back. It's kind of a black box that the information goes into. They may find out if they have LARC2 or they have GBA if that's being studied, or something relevant to the study, but they don't get a comprehensive report back like we do in PD-GENE, and that's really important to get a full reporting of results back. And I think the more we know, the more likely we are to get to a point where we can make more informed treatment decisions with our clinicians, and we have more opportunities to look at drugs or some other modality that may help people with Parkinson's. So it really enriches the environment, the research environment clinically too. So those are some of the reasons why I would participate and encourage anybody who's thinking about, even if they think they'll test negative, as most people will, to still participate anyway.
Okay. And a little piece of that I want to question is, you said some of the other studies won't give you results, like you don't get any results from the research. Like you said, you just go into a black box with no answers. Interesting.
Yeah, you will get some results relevant to the study, but you won't get a full picture like we do here. They won't be looking at this whole array of genes we're looking at in our study.
Okay.
Right. So just to clarify this, legally in the United States, there's a CLIA law that says that you cannot return genetic results back to participants if the lab was not CLIA approved. Now, if you have a study that a postdoc in the lab at Columbia is looking for funky genes, either you're not allowed to return the results back, and you probably shouldn't because you don't know how accurate the reading is. That is the unique feature of PD-GENE, that there's a CLIA-approved genetic lab that is held responsible for the results. So it's a different level of certainty.
Okay. So going with someone very trusted through the PD-GENE.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
Even in 23andMe, they do a lot more genetic testing than what they return back to people. The only results that they return back to people are results that have passed the CLIA approval certification of the FDA that allows them to return the results back.
Okay.
They do their, on the research level, they do way more.
Yeah. Okay.
You just
Thanks.
don't know it.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Dr. Alcalay, you mentioned that you're working with NIH and other genetic leaders across the country and the globe possibly to talk about which specific Parkinson's genetic tests to do. Do you have a timeline of what that could look like?
I'm sorry that I'm going to go back to the same meeting statement that I said, and it's all about funding.
Okay.
So the issue here is tricky. You can have a very good journal, let's say even the level of Nature or Science, that published about a link between Parkinson's and the gene. That will be good enough for this great journal, but that may not be good enough for us to start returning the results back to a participant, because we want other labs and other geneticists working on other ethnicities to prove that this gene is really linked. Because nobody is going to go back to a participant and say, hey, 5 years ago, we told you that you carry a gene to Parkinson's, but then other geneticists tried to replicate it and couldn't find it, so it doesn't work. So when we return results back, we need to make sure that this gene is really linked. And so it's a lot of work, and it's also hard to get all the geneticists to agree, because people advocate for their gene. They said, oh, I found this, we should include that, and we need to get to reach a consensus. So this is true stories. Like in the Parkinson's world, in the genetics, if a gene is linked to Parkinson, they get what they call a PARC assignment. So for example, LRRK2 is PARC8, alpha-synuclein is PARC1, but because the genetics were not that great, alpha-synuclein is also PARC4. And if you want to ask me what's PARC3, we don't know, because it's got assigned to a place in the DNA that is probably not right. So it does require consensus. It's not that simple, and it will always have to be an ongoing process, because we can reach a consensus in 2020, and then a few geneticists will find something else in 2021, and we'll have to revise it.
Okay. A question for clarification. With the PD generation, would it tell me if I have the mutations on one or more of the 7 genes? So
It will tell you whatever you have. So Anne and I participated in a meeting yesterday, and someone presented that there was at least one participant that had 3 mutations, one on Parkin, one on LRRK2, and one on GBA. We didn't know coming in that that would be the result, and they got 3 positive results. That's very unique, but it happens.
Okay. And like what I referenced earlier, the more research and scientific evolutions that come with more genetic information, you would reach back out to those participants to notify
Yeah.
if they have that new mutation. Okay.
Yeah, just because you had 23andMe done earlier and they only looked at 2 variants on those 2 genes, it may be you get some other results with PD generations because we are looking at so much more.
Right. We also had a question: if a parent with Parkinson's that's 92, would it be interesting or motivation for them to participate at that age? My automatic answer is yes. Any thoughts from?
I don't think age is a major factor. The one thing that we do need to caution is that that person wants to participate, because we don't enroll the family members. So I need to make sure that the person participating is interested in participating and understands what they're participating in. We had earlier in the recruitment, not because of age, but because of language gap, cases where it was hard to tell whether the person with Parkinson's actually wanted to participate or not. But if someone wants to participate, we're not going to exclude because of age.
Okay, good to know. All right, a question as we're on Facebook Live right now from Nikita in Amsterdam. I've heard that it is only hereditary for both man and woman have the Parkinson gene. Is that true? It's only hereditary if both man and woman have the Parkinson gene.
Should I take that?
Sure.
So,
Yes.
there are different ways of inheritance. In what we call recessive diseases, you inherit a disease if you got it from both the mom and dad. For example, cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs. These are common diseases that are recessive, and just like you described it, you get it if you got it from both mom and dad. Parkin mutations, DJ1 mutations, and PINK1 mutations act like that. There are other type of inheritance that is called dominant, that it's enough that one of your parents had it, you are at risk of having it. And that's, for example, alpha-synuclein or VPS35. The most common modes of inheritance that we are all familiar with is not that if you have the gene, you'll have the disease. That each one of these genes are a risk factor. And you may have inherited the risk factor from your parent, you may have not. You may have inherited the risk factor from your parent, and your parent would never have Parkinson's and you would, or the other way around. That's the most common mode of inheritance, where we inherit risk factors from your parents, or where if you have the gene, it doesn't mean that you'll have the disease, but if you have the disease with the gene, it's probably that the gene contributed to it. And that's what happens in LRRK2 and GBA. So 1/3 of the people who carry LRRK2 G2/19S mutation will develop Parkinson's. It's still a very large number compared to the 1% or 2% of the population, but it still means that if you inherited this from your parent, your risk for Parkinson's is less than half. So the inheritance is complicated, and we have to go through it when we consent people for PD gene.
Okay. We have another question from Facebook. Would a positive test then qualify for a future pre-existing condition diagnosis? Dr. Alcalay.
So I think that the pre-existing diagnosis is our inclusion criterion. You have to have Parkinson's disease to participate. So if you're looking for something that is looking for pre-existing diagnosis, that is already there. The genetics is, first of all, done in a research lab. So it's your call whether you enter it into the clinical chart or not, but it's not changing the fact that you, in order to participate, you already have a pre-existing diagnosis.
Okay. So I think if the person went through a different genetic counselor and found they do have that mutation, would that qualify? Because I understand where you're saying from our study, you'd have to already be diagnosed with Parkinson's
right.
to participate in PD generation. But if someone went in a different study or
right.
different.
So you're saying if someone without Parkinson's got 23andMe and heard from 23andMe that they have a Parkinson's mutation, is that a pre-existing condition? That depends on what they're signing up for. It is some insurance companies, like life insurance companies, would ask you about genetic studies and some won't. So
Interesting.
it's not a unifying thing, but it is one of the reasons why before we started going to people without Parkinson's, we wanted to first focus on the Parkinson's community because the legality of it is very challenging.
Yes.
Either way, genetic testing is not pre-existing for medical insurance, but other insurances like life insurance or disability insurance, it depends what insurance you get.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a law that covers that's called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, G-I-N-A. And that does cover some of these issues about life insurance, or excuse me, about health insurance, about job protections, housing, I believe. There's a number of factors. I haven't looked at it in a while, but that does cover some of these issues about genetic testing and discrimination based upon that.
Mm-hmm.
But it does not cover life insurance, for example.
Correct. It does not cover life, specifically does not cover life insurance or long-term care insurance for that matter.
Okay.
It does cover hiring, firing, and so forth.
Okay. So a job protection is
Yeah.
used. Okay. And tell us a little more about how to navigate clinical research and find studies to participate in.
Oh, that's a great question. I think, Roy, did you have that on one of your slides?
No, you're going to have to, you'll take that one.
No, I thought it might have been the link. There might have been something with a link to it.
No, sure. So I was joking. The PD gene is on the Parkinson's Foundation website, which is, I strongly encourage the people that I take care of medically to go to the Parkinson's Foundation and the Michael J. Fox Foundation websites. To just Google things is going to be very tricky, but if you look at the Parkinson's Foundation website, there's lots of links there. If I already started, I'll just say there's a website that is called clinicaltrials.gov that I highly recommend because, again, it's regulated website, and then the rest of the answer I'll let Anne fill in.
Yeah, actually, that I was going to direct people to Michael J. Fox, the Parkinson's Foundation, and the clinicaltrials.gov. And then when you see something that you're interested in, clinicaltrials.gov is quite good. They usually have the principal researchers or their staff members' phone number or contact information. And you can reach out to them directly. I've done that in the past, and it's an easy way to find out if you're eligible. Fox has a trial finder that you can sign up for and put in a bunch of information that they request. I think it might include like age of diagnosis, medications, a number of factors, and they will match you from time to time with trials that they think you might be eligible for. A lot of trials information is also found out through your doctor or the research center that you're going to seek your treatment from if you go to a movement disorder clinic. Also, a lot of Parkinson's support groups have information about clinical trials as well, and those might include some other things that might not be in some of the other you might not see elsewhere, like participating in exercise studies or community studies involving psychosocial factors, for example. So there's lots and lots of different ways to find out about clinical trials, and it's a really great thing to do.
Great. And I see that my colleague Danielle has shared a few in the chat section, and we'll also send an email with the links for more information on PD generation and clinicaltrials.gov. All right, Dr. Alcalay, if I live near a participating COE, Center of Excellence, would you prefer me to get tested in person, or could I do the in-home kit instead? And is it just as accurate as a health professional conducting the swab?
The swab is very reliable, and I mean, that's the easiest question. And I think it all depends on the situation, right? So pre-COVID, I would say that a hospital visit is always better because it's more personable, and also you can participate in other studies when you go there. It depends on the Center of Excellence if they can book the appointment close to a clinical follow-up anyways. There's the advantages and the personal aspect of it. In times of COVID, it depends on if in-person visits actually take place in your institution. So the advantage of doing it remotely is that there's no COVID exposure. You don't need to deal with parking lots and with other issues. So it's very personal.
Okay. You had mentioned, Dr. Alcalay, about one unique study that had 3 mutations out of the 7. Were there other key findings that you've learned since the beginning of the pilot PD generation?
Yes. So there are 2 types of findings that we're looking for. One is, what is the mutation carrier frequency? And because it was a pilot and the numbers are pretty large, 300 and something, but it's not large in the big scheme of 15,000, it's really hard to tell whether the percent of carriers we'll find now will be as high as it is now, as it is so far. So we anticipated up to 10%, and we actually find more than 15%. And we don't know if it's because of the referral system, if the first people to participate are those with higher risk, for example, with stronger family history or younger age. As numbers ramp up, we'll see it. The other thing that we wanted to look is how few people feel comfortable with returning of results through a genetic counselor versus local return of results, the satisfaction, the knowledge. And what is emerging is that both ways of returning results seem to work. This is very preliminary and we didn't finish we're working on a manuscript. So both systems seem to work, and people are equally happy with them. The people that get the results back from their doctors may feel a little bit that the results are more integrated into their clinical care, but it's the numbers are not high enough to say it in a definite way, but maybe a hint there. But what's most interesting and very different from what we thought before, when people tested before, let's say for Huntington's disease, which is a devastating neurodegenerative disorder, the people who got positive results, that was not good news for them because it means that they're going to have Huntington's. And people who got negative results, basically they had Huntington's in their family, but they were tested negative. So the approach prior to PDGene was that negative result is reassuring and positive result is maybe depressing because it means something about your genetics. And in PDGene, it's maybe a little bit different, because if you're positive, if they find a gene linked to Parkinson's, it may infirm your eligibility to clinical trials. And some people that just want to know why did they get Parkinson's, they do PDGene, they don't know why they got Parkinson's before. We give them a negative result and they still don't know why they have Parkinson's. So it is possible that the people with positive results are equally satisfied, if not even more satisfied than people that got negative results. It's clear from our studies, from our numbers, that they're not more depressed or more sad or more upset with the results when they got a positive result. So that's one finding that we have there that is very important. Another anecdotal finding is that we didn't expect to see a lot of alpha-synuclein carriers, and we found in that gene that is linked to Parkinson's, of all the genes, is the one that is most closely linked to Parkinson's, because alpha-synuclein is the protein deposited in one brain when people have Parkinson's. We found 5 mutation carriers, and we're trying to work hard to see if we can find a clinical trial for them that targets their gene to participate in.
Okay. This has been a very good Q&A. I have the final question. And I'd like to hear from both of you. So I'll start with Anne. Do I tell my family if I'm a carrier tested positive for the genetic mutation?
Oh boy, that's tough. That really is such a personal decision, I think. I just don't even know what to say about that. I think you need to consider a lot of factors, among other things, your age, your status in life. Are you still working or not? It's not unlike a decision to have the discussion with your family about whether you've got Parkinson's at all.
Thank you. Dr. Alcalay.
The one thing that I would advise, in addition to what Anne said, is think about this question before you participate in PDGene, not after. Because I think you need to come up with a plan before you get the genetic results. But I can give you one example from one of my participants who wasn't sure whether they're going to tell that participant participated with their spouse. They were both in the session, and we're not sure we're going to tell our kids or not if I'm positive, and the test was positive, and by the time they got to the parking lot, their kids already knew. So even though you come up with a plan, you may change it once you get the results. But I think that it's really useful to come up with a plan. And if you're very ambivalent about the plan, then wait with PDG.
Great. I think that's a very good point to thinking about it before the study. And also, you will have access to a genetic counselor as well, right? To go
Yes.
or to talk through the results. So that might be a question to, address with that counselor as well. Well, wow. Thank you guys so much. I feel like my mind has just been blown with all this information and genetic mutations. So I'm glad this is archived so I can review and see how much we've learned since the pilot program and how we've gotten through COVID times by getting to this exciting at-home opportunity for more people to participate. So we'll make sure that people get that in the email where to participate, and any other questions they can reach out to the Parkinson's Foundation. So thank you again, Dr. Alcalay and Anne, for sharing your time with us and your expertise, and we appreciate you so much. And I've just got a few last words to say. So again, this program has been recorded and archived and will be available at the Parkinson's Foundation website, parkinson.org/PD Health. It is here we will find our upcoming PD Health at Home programs, including Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, and Fitness Fridays. If you have any questions that have not been answered, please know we provide free resources, including our website, parkinson.org, our educational book series, webinars, podcasts, and our hospital safety kit called the Aware and Care Kit. And our awesome helpline at 1-800-4PD-INFO is fantastic. And sorry, my phone is ringing. No one calls my phone, so I apologize for that. Last but not least, we are super excited for our October Wellness Wednesdays program, which will be a unique series of social activities encouraging you to try something new while meeting others in the PD community. So next Wednesday, participants will have the opportunity to try art therapy by creating an abstract image, which will contribute to a larger image. So you have to bring your art supplies and your paper, and then you'll be able to hold it up and we'll create an awesome mural. So I hope you come back to us next Wednesday. And until then, we hope you stay well. Thank you.